Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 20th anniversary kickoff, Vision and Action for Equity event. Super grateful for the incredible turnout and support and excitement for today's program. We will finish watching the amazing U.S. Senator from California, Alex Padilla, who has been a huge champion for college opportunity in our state, and what an honor to have him represent us in the U.S. Senate as the first Latino from California to serve in that. So we're going to kick it off today, but before I do that, we ordered the sunshine, the amazing view, and the magic that is this program today would not have been possible without Audrey Dow, who had the vision for me. And the most incredible Campaign for College Opportunity team, especially Joanna Arias, who has been working nonstop, even through her birthday, along with Amber, all of my amazing team. Wave to folks. Don't introduce yourself too much, they might want to steal you. I have an incredible team, let me keep them, thank you. We thought about today and just how important it is to continue the work, and every day that we get up at the Campaign for College Opportunity, it is always focused on how do we ensure that more students, many of whom are first generation, first in their families to go to college, who don't have the support and the resources to attend and feel sometimes like they don't belong. How do we make sure that those students in California have that opportunity? Because I suspect, will you stand if you're first generation college goer? And what I think about is that every time we succeed in ensuring somebody earns an associate degree for transfer, someone isn't placed in a remedial course, we are replicating this room that was standing in multiples so that more students can give back to California, give back to their own families, and have a chance to thrive in this beautiful state. But that would not be possible without the incredible partnerships that we have in each and every one of you. This room is filled with advocates and champions for equity, college leaders, trustees, presidents, board members, many of you who devote a lot of your own personal time beyond your paid time to do what is right for our students, and I just want to thank you so much for all of that. Of course, we can't do this work without the support of our funders, and in particular for this event, I'm just super grateful to the College Futures Foundation for your ongoing support, almost 20 years of support from the College Futures Foundation. Super grateful for Atkinson, Andelson, Loya, Rude, and Romo. I think Gabriel Sandoval is going to join us later today. Go Public Schools, Bank of San Francisco, Chirla, CSU San Bernardino, Fresno State, Los Angeles Community College District, San Francisco State, UC Merced, and US Bank. Thank you for sponsoring today's event. That's why we can have the fancy program that we've put together for you. But of course, to all of our speakers that are joining us today, we are committed regardless of technical difficulties getting started, because we're gonna have to stay on time. So with that, I am super honored. Many of you know my story. I grew up less than 5 miles from here in Echo Park, when Echo Park was a place that was pretty dangerous to live in, where my mom made sure that I didn't go outside unless I asked to go to the library, which was always my get out pass. And my mom, as an immigrant from Mexico with a 6th grade education, who is one of the most brilliant human beings I know, because there is, as we say in Spanish, education and educación. And you don't have to have a formal education to have educación. And my mom taught me you treat people with respect, you work hard, and you go to school so that you can have many opportunities that weren't even possible for her to dream of. I am so grateful as we celebrated her 81st birthday last week, a few weeks ago, to embody all of her wildest dreams. And I know that all of you embody your own ancestors' wildest dreams, so thank you for joining us today. One of my favorite people, Elizabeth Gonzalez, I'd like to welcome her to the stage. She has been a champion for education throughout her philanthropic career, and I'm just honored that I get to call her not just a supporter of the Campaign for College Opportunity, but a personal friend. Thank you for your support.
Michelle, how do you follow that? Well, I'm so excited to be here on behalf of the College Futures Foundation, where we have been a long-time supporter and partner to the campaign, and just thrilled to be here on your inaugural summit. I was joking with Michelle prior to this, that the last time we saw each other was the quinceañera, and so who knew that things, how fast time and what has happened in between that time. But if I could just, as part of the welcome, just share a couple of words like you, Michelle, first generation. I'm the daughter of immigrants from Colima, from Mexico, and I'm from LA. And if you know me, I live in the Bay Area now, but every room I walk into, I always say, let's remember where I'm from. And so this is always, it's wonderful to always feel a homecoming here. Also too, because I come to this work, the daughter of Graciela and Carlos, the daughter of a garment worker. My family represents the California public higher education system. I have 3 brothers. They all graduated from Cal State LA, transferred from Rio Hondo Community College, from Mount SAC. My sister is a graduate from UC Santa Barbara. My mother, Graciela, had her certificate as a teacher's assistant from ELAC, from East LA Community College. So I come here representing that promise of what college can do for a family, so that it actually can deliver on a promise for my family like ours, but actually for generations to come. So it's a really powerful opportunity to share that with you. But I also want to share the partnership, just a couple of stories that I want to lift up regarding the partnership that we've had with the campaign. Recently, we did some work around a report, a very important report called in 2022 called Whiteness Rules. And that's in partnership with Estela Ben-Simon and Associates. We illustrated how racialization happens in college presidential searches across California's public higher education segments. The campaign has long called for the need to address the lack of diversity in faculty and institutional leadership. And that really matters if what we're trying to do is to create an environment in which our learners, the learners who look like us, like many of us who stood up, look that their faculty and their leadership look like them. And so we're just really indebted that we can call you a partner, that we can do that kind of work together so that it continues and that you provide voice to that work. So thank you for that. The aim of our time together is to discuss advancing racial equity in higher education in this post-SCOTUS environment. And that has been a prominent conversation at College Futures amongst many of us here. I think we've been in rooms where we've talked about what does the world look like, what does it need when we have a post-race conscious admissions environment. What are we communicating to our learners, and what's the voice that we need to carry? What's the work that we need to do? And so it's clear to us that the work doesn't stop. In California, we have many years of a world in which we're told that race and class and all of those things don't matter as we think about admissions. And so now's the time not to shy away from this moment. Equity is a core value and a guiding principle for many of us here, and as a member of the College Futures Foundation, it is for us as well. And so, as such, we see our role as being loud and unapologetic equity champion, calling out and calling in leaders in all sectors across the state to lean into their values and intentionally focus on supporting the success of our learners who are currently underserved, who have historically been underserved. That work has not changed, and our voice has not changed behind that. So it also means that we will support and amplify those who are courageous and thinking differently in their approaches for closing persistent racial equity gaps. So I want to leave you with some words from a powerful conversation had by our own CEO and President, Eloy Ortiz Oakley, and two fierce education equity champions, Twee Nguyen and the campaign's own Jesse Ryan, about the recent SCOTUS decisions. And in the spirit of centering learners, I want to quote something Jesse said that I have carried with me since that conversation. Quote, when we have a ruling like the SCOTUS ruling, I'm gonna get this right. When we have a ruling like the SCOTUS ruling, we see students across the country, and certainly here in California, begin to wonder, do they belong? Are they valued? Are they wanted as key parts of our college communities? I think the most important thing we can be doing as advocates and as allies is saying to students that you belong. There is a place for you, and we're going to do everything in our power to remove barriers to your success, to your access, and to your success. Now is not the time to be a bystander. Now is the time to be an upstander. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Michele, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I also really want to thank one of our sponsors. Proud to continue to have so many incredible friends, including Amend, that makes this world, community college, Cal State, UC, access for Black students in California so much better. So thank you for also sponsoring our event. The room is filled with so many people I love, and the amazing part of a 20-year journey as a part of the Campaign for College Opportunity has been that many of you have become family. Many years ago, I met Jay and Adam, young filmmakers. They're still young, just not as young when I first met them, who were documenting the inequality that students and the challenges that students face trying to go to college with their first film that was called First Generation. We have stayed good friends and in contact, and I'm so thrilled to have them share with you throughout today's program previews of their next documentary called The Class, that again uses art and storytelling to highlight the challenges that our students face and how we can better support them. So with that, I'd love to invite Jay up to the stage to share a few words about the amazing work that her and her husband Adam are doing. Jay, thank you for your leadership.
It is such an honor to be here. So as Michele mentioned, we met, I think it was like 15 years ago, and I actually have some slides. So you cue those slides. Yes, so this is, you didn't know you had a star in your midst. We interviewed Michele for our first film, First Generation, and then about 5 years later, so I think this is your 5-year anniversary, here we are at the First Generation premiere here in Los Angeles, which was down at Regal Cinema, just right down the street. And then 5 years later, I think it was the 15-year, this is us with Eloy Ortiz, and we are here at the red carpet premiere down here at Regal Cinema. This is for our feature doc, Unlikely. And then today we're really excited because nobody has seen the sneak peek of our new 6-part docuseries. So we've come a long way from, our credit card funded first documentary to a 6-part television series, which we're going to show you today, called The Class. But just to share a little bit why I do this work, hearing your stories, I was reminded my mom was a student at LA Valley College, and she got pregnant with me and stopped out. And my parents ended up getting divorced, and she ended up graduating from college a year before I did. So I'm not technically first generation, but I'm so grateful because I know the difference that education can make in my life. I ended up going to Columbia University, and right afterwards, my first job was working in the admissions office there. And what I realized was that I had come so far, but when I got behind the scenes, I realized that inequity existed, and I wanted to do something about it. And unlike you guys, I don't have the data or statistics or research. I didn't get a PhD, but I came to LA to tell stories. And I believe that stories can make a difference, because when students see themselves on the screen, when they see what's possible, when they see what they can do, and when you name who they are, that they're first generation, that they come from a family that worked hard to get their education, then change is possible. And I think stories and media can make a huge difference. So Adam and I, our company, 3 Frame Media, we do long-form, purpose-driven storytelling because people remember characters. I'm sure you guys all have a favorite show and a character that you think about. And what we want to do is bring education and these stories of representation to the big screen so that people remember, that they know that they belong, and so we can make a difference in equity. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for watching. You're going to see some clips today, and other people will tell you more about them. But if you have stories that are important to elevate and tell, please come talk to us. We'd love to partner with you in that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Michelle, for being our partner for so many years. We're so excited to be here today. We love you.
She keeps the receipts. She knows exactly how long we've been good friends. Thank you so much, Jay and Adam, for your incredible, incredible work. We're gonna get started. We've been starting, but we're gonna get started some more. So we're gonna go right into our first plenary session. I am so excited that I have the kind of board leadership that can anticipate the challenges that are coming forward. Over a year and a half ago, the board, led by our chair, Tom Saenz, the head of MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, our vice chair, Ed Bush, raised the issue of the upcoming Supreme Court decision. And we began very early conversations about what does it mean for us to engage in that work? Should we engage in that work? How can we support ensuring that every student understands that regardless of what this court decides in those rulings, in California and across this nation, no one is gonna tell a Black, a Latino, an Asian American, a low-income student that they do not belong in higher education, and we're gonna do everything we can to ensure that that's the reality. So I just wanna thank my board and ask them to stand up so you can give them a round of applause, because without their guidance, their expertise, their leadership, we can't do the work that we do. Maria Ott, Tom Saenz, Ed Bush are present here today. Thank you for all of you. And of course, when we had this idea about responding to the Supreme Court decision, the board was committed to doing it within the resources that we had, but what an honor to reach out to funders who said, yes, you can use our funding in flexible ways, Elizabeth, or who said, yes, we're gonna actually double your grant so that you can do it in that way, Nina, and folks that had never funded the campaign and stepped in and said, absolutely, this is important. Bonnie Kwan, please help me welcome Bonnie to the stage from the Kellogg Foundation, and to give her a big round of support, not only for her support of the campaign's work to do this, but for Kellogg's focused work to champion racial equity across the United States of America. Thank you, Bonnie, for your support.
Good morning. It's my honor to welcome you to the opening plenary, which means a lot to me professionally because all of the speakers are from organizations that Kellogg looks to as leaders for building an equitable and just future for all children. And it's personally meaningful for me as a daughter of struggling immigrants, as a parent of 2 kids in public school, and as someone who's benefited from race-conscious policies. When the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in higher education, the majority ignored the realities of racism and prejudice that persist in our country and the barriers young people of color face on the path to college. The court's decision took away an important tool colleges and universities have relied on to advance racial equity in higher education. The affirmative action cases are emblematic. We're living at a time when resistance to racial equity is heightened, and concerted efforts to dismantle other race-conscious policies, and false narratives about colorblindness persist. Yet we know that our communities and our country are better off when we tackle barriers to ensure that all children, no matter what they look like or where they come from, can pursue opportunities in higher education. By ensuring that young people of color are able to access college educations, we unlock the full talents and perspectives necessary to create a vibrant future in a multiracial democracy. We also create the settings to nurture the innovations and thought leadership necessary to meet the climate, technological, and humanitarian challenges of our times. Given the stakes, we are now called to take on with renewed urgency, removing all inequitable barriers to higher ed. As we pass generational batons, our work is to create, protect, and advance every tool and policy that advances racial equity in our education system. In the aftermath of the affirmative action cases, there has been confusion, fear, and worry about the scope of the rulings for students, families, and advocates alike. That is why the work of the campaign, our speakers and their organizations, is so critical. Their understanding of the practical and legal implications of the ruling provide a map on which to chart next steps. The fight for racial equity is about fairness. It's about creating a world where race is not a barrier to achieving one's highest potential. Racial equity is the practice by which the Kellogg Foundation's vision of a country that marshals its resources to provide all children an equitable and promising future comes to fruition. In our shared work ahead, Kellogg is committed to leaders like the campaign who are bringing together experts, scholars, educational leaders, and students to ensure underrepresented young people of color have the fair and equal opportunity to grow, learn, and flourish in college and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your support, for your leadership across this country. So grateful for that. We are going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling, and we are joined by 4 incredible leaders. So I'd like to invite them to the stage. Thomas Saenz, President and General Counsel of MALDEF and Campaign for College Opportunity Board Chair. David Hinojosa, Director of the Educational Opportunities Project with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. He defended race-conscious admissions before this Supreme Court. And so we're excited, David, that you came to see us and join us today. And then Vincent Pan, Co-Executive Director for Chinese for Affirmative Action, also former Campaign for College Opportunity Board member. Vincent, thank you for your leadership and support. Vincent, Tom, and I also served on the Yes on Prop 16 ballot measure committee. So honored to be here in their company again. And last but definitely not least, Lisa Holder, President of the Equal Justice Society and member of the California Reparations Task Force. So please join me in giving these amazing leaders a big round of applause. I need my notes. So we're going to get started, and there is an opportunity for questions, and I think you will see a QR code. The staff is way tech savvier than I am, so just point and shoot and put your questions in. The staff are going to be collecting them and giving them to us so we could ask our panelists. I'm going to start right away. You know, on June 29th, we know that this Supreme Court reversed more than 40 years of precedents that allowed race-conscious admissions in higher education. And many of us who are in California know that obviously Prop 209 banned affirmative action in college and university admissions and public contracting in our state. Some may have thought that this ruling had no impact to our own state, but we know that we have an incredible network of colleges and universities, including USC, the Claremont colleges, Stanford, that certainly used race-conscious admissions in their efforts, and they serve as many students as attend the University of California. More so, we were very concerned that this would give a lot of support for folks that aren't supportive of racial equity practices in general. But let's get started with the ruling itself. David, thank you for your leadership, for championing this, for arguing before the Supreme Court. What did this ruling say? What are the real implications of it?
Thank you, Michelle. And it's always wonderful to be back in California, especially Southern California. Folks may not know this, it's not on my bio, but I actually started my college career just east of here, about 60 miles at San Bernardino Valley College when I was in the Air Force taking a few college classes. So I may be the first San Bernardino Valley College student to have argued before the US Supreme Court, perhaps.
Nice.
So what does this court ruling say, and what does it mean for us, right, in reality? So it's a terrible decision. I will start that off, right? Everybody knows that. It didn't actually overrule Grutter v. Bollinger, which was a 2003 case that authorized race-conscious admissions, but it severely underruled that ruling. So what does that mean? So in essence, it did make it incredibly more difficult to consider race. It doesn't mean that you can absolutely never consider race for admissions. Whether or not you can consider it for the educational benefits of diversity is likely not necessarily on the table. And there's a few reasons how and why. And I do want to also add that they were swinging for the fences, not just to knock out affirmative action in these cases, but their ultimate goal is to entrench a system where all these bought up, unearned privileges over generations can multiply and create pathways just for the communities that they care about, but not for our multiracial democracy, right? So they were trying to overrule Grutter, but were also trying to overrule what we call strict scrutiny that allows you to consider race in certain circumstances, so long as it's achieved through narrowly tailored means and you have a compelling interest. I'm not going to get too much further into that. I know the campaign has a summary of the decision, and we do too on our website. But it made it more difficult by saying that the way that Harvard and UNC had articulated their goals of diversity those goals themselves were not problematic. The problem was that the court found, despite the evidence to the contrary, that those goals weren't being measured in the kind of precise way that made them, the majority, comfortable. They also felt that it would lead to stereotyping, negative stereotyping of students, despite the incredible testimony from students that we represented, showing about how when you admit more students of color, you actually have a broader perspectives offered, from different experiences. There's diversity within diversity, right? And we look no further than two of the justices who were there on October 31st when the case was argued between Justices Jackson and Justice Thomas. Incredibly different perspectives, right? And no one ever suggested that Justice Thomas was speaking for Black people, or that even Justice Jackson speaks for Black people, although some of us may think that a little bit more than Justice Thomas, perhaps. But again, it went against the weight of the evidence. They also said it was a zero-sum game, as though admissions is coordinated in the sense of, oh, well, we're gonna compare this application to this other application, and we're gonna let this person in because they're Black or brown or indigenous, right? That's the mentality they had. I even got a question from Justice Alito saying, well, let's say there's a 100-yard dash and someone gets a 10-yard start. Do you think that's fair? And I said, no, I don't think that's fair, but that's not how race-conscious admissions operates, right? But in their minds, that's the way that they were thinking about. And we did have a very different court in 2023 than what sat in 2003 during the Grutter decision. We did not have Justice Kennedy. We did not have Justice O'Connor. And so it was going to make it much more difficult. And then finally, they said that there was no logical endpoint. So what does that mean? Well, there's no logical endpoint in the sense that they're not saying when they're going to wind down considering race. And that was, there's differences of opinion, on that particular point. But they did this by hollowing out. One of my good friends, Ted Shaw, he used to lead LDF and is now a professor of law at UNC, said that Brown v. Board was once hallowed, and now the Supreme Court has hollowed Brown v. Board. And they did this by suggesting that the Equal Protection Clause was a colorblind. We required colorblindness, right? And we did write this article ahead of the opinion, me and a colleague of mine who was co-counsel in the case at the time, The Absurd Reach of a Colorblind Constitution, published by American University Law School. And there's different reaches of what colorblind can actually mean. It sounds crazy, but it does, and so what they were suggesting is you could never mention race in an application. That was their furthest, how far they were going. The Supreme Court didn't quite go there. I know we're going to possibly have, another question particularly on that point. But the fact is that they use that to justify how and why they tightened it so much more difficult for universities, to now consider race. Then finally, what does that mean? That means on the one hand, it actually shouldn't change much of what universities are doing, because universities weren't giving bonus points. They weren't, they can't have race as a factor in their admissions policy unless somehow it meets a compelling interest. And there may be other compelling interests out there even beyond the educational benefits of diversity. So it might not change much at all if students can still lift up their race and racial experiences in their application, which they absolutely can do. But on the other hand, you have people like Ed Balloon, like Stephen Miller, trying to push and threaten and intimidate so many university professionals. And then you have these general counsels, and apologies to any general counsels who might be in the office, but they're retracting and turning into 100% foolproof at-risk, risk assessment officers. And that's the worst that can happen. And I know that from personal experience because I was waitlisted at UT Law the year after the Hopwood decision there. We went from 72 Latinos 2 years before me to 26 in a class of over 400. And this is Texas, right? There were over 40 African American students in the class 2 years before me. My year, there were 4. Did somehow we become less qualified? Did somehow, our attributes and, all these attorneys who had been admitted previously were somehow less qualified? Absolutely not. But that was, kind of the mindset that was being set in. So it is an incredible, dangerous point that we're at, but we have to advance racial equity and access and opportunity. That absolutely can happen in spite of this terrible decision. We're continuing to do it. There's still one affirmative action case against UT Austin, SFFA versus UT Austin. UT Austin has dropped race. They want a completely race-blind admissions process. We and UT Austin, we represent student and organizational interveners in that case. We think their case is over already, but we also think that the Supreme Court ruling doesn't require that kind of race blindness in the whole admissions process.
Thank you, David. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to read Justice Sonia Sotomayor's opinion in this case, I feel like it's a masterclass in race in America that really challenges this notion of color blindness. So definitely recommend that for good reading. Tom, you and I have talked a lot about what this case doesn't say, and we've all talked about our concerns around the chilling effect that this case could have. Can you talk to us more about that?
I just want to
Push that button there. Here, have mine. Take this one. I'll take that.
I want to start by being very succinct about what the court did do. David's given us the details, but I think no one should ever forget that what the court majority effectively did is overrule a 45-year-old precedent in Bakke versus University of California Regents. It's important to remember that because this is the second time that this court has overruled a precedent of over 40 years. They did it first with Roe versus Wade when they overturned that 49-year-old precedent in Dobbs a year ago. This is the second, then, time that this new court majority has overturned long-standing law, in this case 45 years, and it was to undermine the ongoing attempt to restore or introduce for the first time racial justice and equity in our educational system. But here in California, given our experience with Prop 209 27 years ago, we knew in advance what the other side would do with a decision like the one we got overturning Bakke. They would attempt to take it far beyond its words. And that's why it's very important that we in California lead in establishing for everyone what this decision did not do. First, it is not a mandate or even an invitation to race blindness or race ignorance. It is not a mandate or invitation to ignore race or racial disparity in education policymaking. We saw this in California 27 years ago when they tried to tell us, you can't talk about race after Proposition 209 was enacted. False then and false here. Not just because, as David explained, Chief Justice Roberts made clear that all they were doing was striking down the systemic consideration of race in admissions, that they were not preventing the consideration of any individual applicant's experience of race, racial discrimination, racial justice, to the extent those played a role in creating them as the applicant they are today. So in admissions, you can still talk about race. But in policymaking, you must still talk about race, because there remain legal obligations under federal and in a number of states, including this one, and under state law that require you to be aware of the evident racial disparities in your processes and criteria, and to root out those unnecessary criteria that create significant racial disparities. So far from a race ignorance mandate, there remains a legal and certainly moral obligation to consider race in policymaking. Second, and here we have seen cases where the folks even at Bloom behind the SFFA case have attempted to use the decision to apply in other contexts. But to be clear, this decision changed nothing about the law applicable in the workplace, in contracting, or in other arenas besides higher education admissions. Did not change the law with respect to affirmative action in employment, contracting, or any other social endeavor. They're attempting to argue that it did, and certainly they're emboldened by the outcome to attempt to apply pre-existing law to wipe out virtually every effort to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And third, particularly important in the ongoing battle nationwide on critical issues of curriculum, it is important to note that this decision says absolutely nothing about curriculum in the form of ethnic studies, racial studies, critical racial theory, whatever you want to talk about in curriculum, this decision has nothing to do with it. That's important because we are going into a campaign next year that will perhaps be the most raw and coarse presidential campaign in our entire history, with repercussions on every classroom from pre-K through graduate school in this country. And there are folks who will assert that the Supreme Court has said, you can't have a Black Studies course. You can't have a Latino Studies course. Absolutely false. And the reason is that the Supreme Court has previously established in a somewhat related decision that issues and subject matters have no race. Only people have a race. So Black studies, Latino studies do not have a race. This decision says nothing about curriculum whatsoever. And I just want to end by giving one more example of what I think did come out of this decision that we should embrace. And that is the Supreme Court majority in overturning Bakke rejected diversity as a compelling government interest. One problem with Bakke in 1978 is that it made us all put diversity first in our discussions of these issues. Because the justice who decided what the law was in Bakke, Justice Lewis Powell, said that diversity alone was the only compelling government interest that could support race-conscious affirmative action. He specifically rejected the notion of remedying societal discrimination as an acceptable compelling interest. So the one, and it is small but important, silver lining from this decision is that we are freed from having to subordinate equity to diversity. Don't get me wrong, diversity is very important, but among the problems with it is that it focuses on what are the benefits for white students from having Black, brown students in the classroom. And it subordinates equity. We don't have to do that anymore. We can lead with equity. We can lead with the injustice in our existing admission system and the imperative of rooting out ongoing, continuing discrimination as manifested inequitably in those criteria. So we can now lead with equity.
Thank you, Tom. Vincent, I'd like to ask you to address two questions. One is, can you talk about how Asian Americans have been used to pit us against each other in conversations about equity? And two, what does this mean for California, given that we have Prop 209 and a ban on affirmative action?
Sure. Let me start with the second question first, because I think what we learned from Prop 209 can be very important for how we as a country move forward, which is to say that we can look at specific programs. In this case, we could look at higher education admissions in both public and private universities. And so Prop 209 already covered public universities in California. And so in some ways, as a programmatic issue, there's nothing about this case that dramatically changes things from how public universities would run their admissions programs. Private universities in California now will have to take a look at what they're doing. But we can also look at beyond the program, the general policy area, which is what Tom and David are getting at, which is that this ruling, though may be limited to the specific program of higher education admissions, will be sought to be overinterpreted or interpreted in a way to try and drive a broader agenda. And so this is where the additional attacks against diversity efforts, equity efforts, inclusion efforts in employment, in contracting, in other forms of public policy will begin to move, and where in California, Prop 209 actually was a bit broader, unfortunately, because it did cover not only public education, it did cover public contracting and public employment as well. But I think the real danger, and this is where Asian Americans really factor in, it's our whole understanding of how we want to discuss and move forward on what is probably one of this country's original sins. The sin of how we treat race in the United States. Right? And as the country is becoming more diverse, it becomes more important, not less, more important to address issues of equity. And so for Asian Americans in particular, for our organization, we understand that we do have to understand that race has to be put into context, that history matters, that nuances matter. And so in this particular case, even though Asian Americans did not figure importantly in the decision, in fact, probably the outcome of this case was set in motion as the court composition changed. Right? So as a matter of legal relevance, Asian Americans were not critical to this decision. Right? I think only mentioned very briefly in any of the ruling documents. But as a matter of public discourse, it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical to understand that all of us benefit from an emphasis on equity, to understand that Asian Americans are very diverse, as are other communities of color, to know that within the Asian American communities, that the plaintiffs in this case selectively defined Asian Americans to exclude some of the most marginalized Asian American communities, and to try and hide the fact that overall in this country, Asian Americans not only support affirmative action, but experience racism and discrimination as well. Right? And so as Tom mentioned, what we're expecting next year at our organization, you can watch any of these Republican primaries if you want to spend your time that way, but you will hear this drumbeat, and whether it was 4 years ago, as the former president came down, the escalator declaring that Mexican immigrants were rapists, and now talking about China, and the fear of China as the #1 existential threat. Race has always mattered in the United States, but I think we have to really lean into equity and understanding. We have to make it matter for good, and we have to make it matter for fairness. And so I do think that how Asian Americans showed up in this debate, unfortunately, even though they did not represent the majority of Asian Americans, will continue to be one of the strategies, one of the tactics of the far right to try and divide this country.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you so much for your leadership. Somebody that I admire a lot, Lisa Holder, head of the Equal Justice Society, pursued litigation against the University of California to demand that they drop the use of the SAT, ACT, and admissions. So please give her a big round of applause for her leadership. Really championing a true equity issue. I'm going to also ask you 2 questions, and then if you all have questions, we will have 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience. Can you talk to us about the importance of the decision to remove SAT, ACT, and admissions, and how we can continue to use our legal system to really advocate for greater equity in higher education, Lisa? And I know that as a member of the California Reparations Task Force, you have powerful recommendations for how we can continue to champion equity in education for all students in California. It's on.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, Michelle, the admiration is mutual, and this is such a beautiful venue and a beautiful way to start the day on this panel with such brilliant minds. So I'm really happy to be here. So I want to start off by underscoring the importance of something that Tom just said about how, in some ways, we need to see this moment as an opportunity, because we have been hamstrung for so many decades by this notion that we have to put everything that has to do with racial justice in this limited diversity bucket. This is a moment for us to be bold, for us to be unapologetic about racial justice, and to let go of this notion that it is simply utilitarian. Racial justice is about liberation, and about liberation for all. And I want to talk about the SAT and the ACT removal. And in many ways it was very prescient, because we saw what was coming down the pike. We saw that with the changes in the Supreme Court, what was going to happen to affirmative action, and how it was going to continue to be undermined and stymied and eliminated and eventually erased. Because affirmative action was actually never big enough to begin with. It was never bold enough to begin with. It was always conciliatory, and it was always extremely vulnerable. And again, it gives us that mandate to be very, very bold in the way that we talk about racial justice, racial advancement, and liberation. So in 2019, we brought a case against the University of California Regents, arguing that the ACT and the SAT were barriers to opportunity, that they were racially discriminatory, and that they were also discriminatory on the basis of disability. EJS partnered with public counsel and disability rights, civil rights lawyers in DC, and also the Miller Group, which was down in Orange County, another disability rights, civil rights lawyer. We brought that case again in 2019 during the pandemic, and we specifically asked for a preliminary injunction to stop the use of the ACT and the SAT in all University of California schools. And we won. No one thought we could win, but we won. We won that preliminary injunction, and we were able to compel the UC to actually go test free. And there was a domino effect. Once the UC went test free, the entire state's public school higher education system went test free. And now we no longer have that gatekeeper barrier test to our public school higher education system. There's a couple of things that I just want to mention about that case. The opponents to that case told us that going test-free would not increase diversity in our UC system or in our state school system. They told us that going test-free would diminish the caliber of the students that entered into our public higher education system. Well, the empirical evidence collected in 2023, 2 years after UC went test-free, proved them definitively wrong on both accounts. One of our primary opponents, BORS is the Board of Admission and Relations that created the SAT, and they were virulently against the removal of the SAT because it's also a $1 billion industry for prep, for SAT prep. So they had a lot of skin in the game. Well, poetic justice, and something that has been extremely satisfying, is that BORS in 2023, when they looked at what happened when we removed that test, they actually admitted in their 2023 annual report that the elimination of the SAT and ACT tests have demonstrated a way in which UC can lead in advancing access and opportunity for state students. They admitted in their annual report that the data shows an increase in applicants and enrollees of color with no decrease in performance metrics for first-year students. And the impact, it cannot be understated. In fall of 2021, immediately after the tests we went test-free, the UC system saw a record number of undergraduate applications, including applications from underrepresented students, for an overall increase of 13%. The number of Black applicants increased by 21.8%. Latinx applicants increased by 12.2% compared to 2020. At UCLA, freshman applications in 2021 rose 28% overall from the previous fall. Black applicants rose by 48%. Latinx applicants rose by 33%. And indigenous student applicants rose by 16.8%. Since the UC went test-free, the number of indigenous students in our UC system has risen by 16%. That is a massive increase. This was a critical test case, especially at this inflection point, because it allows us to think more expansively about the ways that we are going to remove the structural barriers to access that are embedded in a history of racial oppression. And with that said, I just want to take a minute to talk about some of the other really important opportunities that are on the horizon. And these are opportunities that those of us on the California Reparations Task Force have seized in our recommendations for increasing equity, especially equity centering African Americans. And those recommendations are now sitting on the governor's desk and on the legislators' desks up in Sacramento. So a couple of the amazing opportunities that we are looking at expanding, especially when we look at what happened with the removal of the SAT and the ACT and going test-free, is we are looking to actually go test-free in graduate level education. And that is one of the recommendations of the California Reparations Task Force, that all public graduate school education needs to remove the test requirements. And what are they saying? They are saying that if you go test-free in graduate education, there will be no increase in diversity. If you go test-free in graduate education, the caliber of graduate students will decrease. Well, we saw where that line of argument went last time, and so we are undeterred. I'll stop with that.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that, because, we're starting this morning with, we are sobered, right, by the state of our nation, by the politics of the Supreme Court, by the very real attacks on our community, and yet we know that there is so much opportunity to advance an agenda that really is explicit about racial equity, and that has been part of why we launched our effort, Ensuring Equity, Firming Inclusion, Empowering Action, and as a series of real, tangible solutions to ensuring equity in higher education, because affirmative action, race-conscious admissions, as you said, was never intended to be a panacea to solve the many challenges in higher education. So please visit our website to review those. They include a brief on the elimination of test, and they include a brief just released today on inclusive hiring practices that Dr. Frank Harris, right here in this room, co-authored with Dr. Luke Wood on our board. So just encourage all of you, and I think I'm getting the questions from the audience over here from Vikash, so if you can bring them over, because I know we have a few minutes left and we want to get to them. Got it. So this is the first question for the panelists. Do you think the Supreme Court decision will affect other minority groups who seek higher education, especially for those people who live under openly hostile state governments? For example, queer people.
Well, I think it depends on how we react, right? I think if we sort of see this again as a wake-up call that affirmative action was not the be-all, end-all to how we get to equity, and maybe in terms of how it's been ruled upon has been a limiting factor in terms of how we've approached it, that it can be a moment, if we seize it, to really make sure that when we say all of us, we mean all of us. And I think the case that Lisa brought up, I think is so important, and CA was proud to be represented by EJS in that. Because I think that what we saw with Prop 209 is before it was even implemented, the number of students from underrepresented backgrounds who applied dropped dramatically, right? And so, that's before like any applications even got to any admissions officers, right? And so how we understand this moment and how we understand these structural barriers, including for queer students, is really important, right? And we have to understand that part of our job is to go forward and to look at the standardized test, to look at ethnic studies and curriculum, to look at the diversity of faculty, to look at community college transfers. There's so many things that continue to be, available and have always been available that we have to double down on, and we should look at the full range of students who have been marginalized and, who have not been welcome.
Thank
And
you.
if I could just expand on what Vin said, I think there is an opportunity, as Lisa explained here, to arrive at an admission system that is fair for everyone, for students not just based on racial identity, but based on other identities as well. So one of the things that we do see, unfortunately, happening in hostile states is an effort to erase communities in curriculum, erase communities in schools, and that includes the LGBTQ plus community. We then have this opportunity to look at all the criteria that are used and root out bias, and that's not just racial bias. So beyond standardized testing, of course, we know that teachers and principals, just like police officers, as demonstrated to us in the incredibly powerful Black Lives Matter movement, that teachers and principals have stereotypes, subconscious biases that play out when they decide who gets access to the AP course, who gets access to the honors course, and they play out when they write recommendations for college. And yet we still view teacher recommendations, council recommendations as an expected part of our admission system. But those subconscious biases play out in those recommendations across the board, and not just against Black and brown students. I guarantee you, plays out against LGBTQ plus students as well. So we have this opportunity to revisit the whole industry of admissions criteria writ large, question them, and use the most modern thinking to protect against those biases.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Tom. I have a question for you, David. If this decision says applicants are allowed to discuss their race and the role it has played in making them the person they are today, can institutions include an admissions question that asks applicants to discuss how their own racial ethnic background has made them the person they are today? And this room is full of K-12 educators and leaders, so I know we all want the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think that absolutely is permissible. The decision does have some problematic language that talks about not trying to do an end run of the decision and trying to use certain parts of the application process and admissions process as proxies, for race, but simply inquiring about, someone's own racial experiences. If they care to lift up those particular experiences, they absolutely can, and universities can solicit, because they're not, at the heart of the decision is the differing treatment of a person according to their race, right? So that doesn't mean, it might be a white student body president at a majority minority school who rose up and understood, the very complicated notions of race that they previously hadn't seen, before. It might be someone like our own Luis Acosta, who is now in his 4th year of medical school at UNC, but wrote in his application about how he wanted to become a doctor because when he visited his grandmother, in Mexico and saw that she had an abscess in her knee, a hole in her knee, he told her, I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna become a doctor and I'm gonna come back and help you. So there's lots of incredible experiences that can be lifted up. Again, the opposition is going to say, absolutely, you can't do that. The UNC system guidance is one example of the most extreme, terrible guidance out there, trying to draw fear and intimidate universities like UNC, which enrolls 8 to 9% of Black students at its flagship university in the same state where Black people are 22% of the population. And they're trying to push them into a corner and make sure that they don't open up these doors of opportunities. But it's entirely relevant, to most universities' own broader missions of ensuring, a more inclusive and broad, students who bring in, very broad perspectives and have deep experiences, and those include racial experiences. We have a Q&A on our website also, affirmative action Q&A. Again, it's not legal advice, but it's...
Consult your own lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that, David. Lisa, I'd like to ask you to share some of the recommendations that speak to achieving equity in education for Black students that's included in the Reparations Task Force, but obviously many of them are so applicable across our state.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. It gives me, it makes me feel like it was a good thing to bring this book. This thing weighs a lot, so I'm like, I want to be able to talk about it when I carry it around. This is the report that the California Reparations Task Force produced after 2 years of deliberations, speaking to hundreds of experts on race all over the United States, speaking to thousands of African Americans in the state of California, to provide anecdotal testimony about the continuing stigmatization and harm of anti-Black racism that is ongoing. And after 2 years of hearings, 2 years of listening sessions all over the state of California, listening sessions that looked very much like a truth and reconciliation process, we were able to put together this 1,100-page tome of social science and data and history on the history of anti-Black racism in the state of California, that not only looks at that not only describes what has happened historically, but shows the through line between what has happened historically and what is happening today in the present, and the outcomes, the disparate outcomes that we continue to see in every single sector of California life for Black people are very much rooted in the history of discrimination of this state. But it is so important to understand that these harms are continuing, the discrimination and the anti-Black animus continues, and it's having a tremendous impact on Black people in the state of California today, such that in every metric that matters in the state of California, Black people are at the bottom. So, a couple of really important opportunities that we sought to create when we put together 116 recommendations to the California legislature of what reparations should look like to pay a debt owed to Black Californians, is we looked at, number one, reviving freedom schools. And freedom schools were becoming popular in the 60s during the Black Power movement, and they were schools where Black youth could receive affirmative information about their history and about the contributions that Black people have made to the fabric of American society. We are looking to revive freedom schools and create publicly funded summer programs for freedom schools for Black youth in California. We are also recommending the elimination of standardized testing in graduate school education, in all public graduate education in the state of California. And we are looking to advance Black Studies curriculums. So right now, we do have an ethnic studies curriculum requirement in the state of California. And what the work of the task force, part of our work as a task force, was to work with education professors at Berkeley and curriculum experts to actually build a Black Studies curriculum that could be embedded in K through 12 education to supplement the ethnic studies curriculums that now exist. So those are some of the opportunities that we are trying to create through reparations in California.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I appreciate that we have solutions and recommendations. We couldn't cover all of them in this like rapid fire hour. I have one last rapid fire question for each of you. I want you to think about what gives you hope. I suspect that Luis Acosta gives you hope, David, but if you can think about that while you think about it, I'm just really impressed. I was waiting to see if anybody would grab one of these big water bottles we have up here, and apparently there was a taker. I was like, wow, who's gonna drink from that big water bottle? We'll put it in a cup, rightfully so. Good job, Tom. So what gives you hope? Tom, we'll start with you.
Youth give me hope. That's why these issues are so centrally important, not just for higher education, but for the future of our society. But the fact that youth talk about these issues in a very different way, much even before this decision, they would talk about equity and separate equity, I believe, in ways that their predecessors did not, because we felt constrained by this diversity framework. So youth and their approach to these issues give me hope.
I think connected to that, truth gives me hope. I think we have to fight to protect truth. I think one of the reasons why young people have been more mobilized is that they've had more access to truth than many of us did, through the availability of information today. But I think it's incredibly important that we continue to fight to protect truth.
Yeah, of course, students, I think a lot of our work works hand in hand, with students, but I also want to say a little bit more broadly about, the belief and the pursuit of a true multiracial democracy in this country and what the hell that really means. Because there are so many people that undermine, that effort. And it's incredible that they're actually we're pro-equity. What does that make them? Anti-equity, right? We're pro-civil rights. What does that make them? Anti-civil rights. Pro-equality. What are they? Anti-equality. And we need to try and shape this, narrative, but we still all want to pursue, ultimately that real multiracial democracy. I even presented recently, I had a debate with someone from the Heritage Foundation, and it was sponsored by the Federalist Society.
Fun times.
In part by the Federalist Society and the Latino Law Student Association at UIUC in Illinois. But I went through a series of questions about, how many of you agree with this? How many of you agree with this? And I saw 90% of those heads nodding because they really do agree with a lot of what we really think and hope for true multiracial democracy in America. And how we get there, unfortunately, that's where everything, starts filtering out.
Thank you. Lisa.
My ancestry gives me hope. I always cling to the words of Maya Angelou and remember that I am the hope and dream of an enslaved person. And telling their story gives me hope.
Well, each of you certainly give me hope, both the amazing champions, advocates, leaders on this panel, and all of you joining us here today. So please join me in giving them a well-deserved round of applause.